Hello again, YouTube. Let's talk about the Confederate flag. Now, last month on June 11th, I was strolling through the grocery store when I happened to notice in the magazine section a magazine which said, "The Civil War, Opposing Views of Freedom." And I thought that this was so bizarre that I had to take a picture of the magazine cover and post it to Twitter with the caption, "Opposing Views of Freedom. Is that so?" Because I have the conventional Yankee view of history in which the American Civil War was primarily caused by the southern states seceding from the Union in order to defend the institution of slavery, and that slavery was the primary reason for secession. Now, throughout the last 150 years of history, there has been a concerted effort amongst certain people to downplay and rewrite that aspect of history. And less than a week later, this would become a urgent topic of cultural discussion because of a racially motivated mass murder in Charleston, South Carolina. And in the wake of that tragedy, there was a focus of people wanting to remove the Confederate flag from the State House in South Carolina. It never should have been up to begin with, but the reason it was up to begin with was because it was a kind of protest against the civil rights movement. And as many other people have pointed out in videos and articles, the Young Turks, for example, did several good videos of the Confederate flag issue. There is an undeniable racist and slavery history and connection with the Confederate flag. It was used by the Confederacy. It was used by the Ku Klux Klan. It was used by people opposed to civil rights and who were pro-segregation. Anti-civil rights was the primary instigation of the reemergence of the Confederate flag in the 50s and 60s. And as all of this became mainstream news, there of course was a backlash to the backlash. People came out to defend the flag and, why are you trying to take away my flag? It's a southern, it's a flag of Southern pride and all these other things. I shouldn't single out Southerners alone, because there were Yankees, there were people from the North who have never in their life set their foot below the Mason-Dixon line who were also defending the flag. People who arguably should have known better who were defending the flag. So in light of all this, I found myself asking myself a couple of questions. First, why exactly are people defending this flag, rather than just go with obvious reasons? And the second question, which I haven't been able to find any sort of clear answer to, and if you want to give a shot to answer this, I'd like to hear your take on it, is how the Confederate flag became the kind of pop culture symbol that it is, to the point at which it reached this level where many people viewed it as being kind of innocuous rather than looking at its history. People overlooked its history and thought, well, that's just the rebel flag, the Southern flag, and had this bizarre postmodern view that it was completely disconnected from the flag's history. And on that count, I have to say that I can almost understand that kind of ignorance, because when I was 11 years old, I was at a fort. I can't remember the name of the fort. It's in Lake George, New York. I was on a school field trip. It was a British fort in colonial times. And in the gift shop, I bought a Confederate flag, thinking that it was the Texas flag, because my mother and my mother's side of the family is from Texas. My 11-year-old self can at least understand that kind of ignorance. I really didn't understand what exactly the flag was and represented, and was confused for some reason, which is fairly understandable. I thought it had to do with Texas. As to the first question, why are people defending it? I think there's a lot of different reasons. There are people who are just blatantly defending it for what I would call all the wrong reasons, such as the Ku Klux Klan deciding to hold a pro-Confederate flag rally at the State House in South Carolina. That should have been the moment that many of the defenders of the Confederate flag stepped back and went, yeah, our allies in this debate are the KKK. Maybe we really should rethink this. But there were a lot of people who, in response to things like Walmart, Amazon, eBay no longer selling Confederate flag merchandise, who took it upon themselves to hold Confederate flag rallies, to drive around Walmart parking lots with Confederate flags in the back of their trucks. I have discovered that there is a version of the Confederate flag with 3 deer on it. I suppose it's some sort of reference to deer hunting, and when I saw this, all I could think was, well, yeah, I suppose that's easier than having redneck tattooed to your forehead. A lot of people seem to be defending this flag because it's taken on a completely separate set of meanings from its more obvious historical origin and, connotation. Certain people view it as the flag of Southern pride, or the Southern flag. Or my personal favorite is it's about Southern heritage, which they're sort of vague about what exact aspect of their heritage this flag's supposed to represent. And again, I feel that there's a profound amount of denial going on. When you have something which it has a clear historical origin, it has a very clear, for many people, connotation of what the flag means. It has a history behind it, that people have come along and say, well, actually it means this other thing. It's not merely ignorance, but it's belligerent ignorance is what I view it as. People who refuse to acknowledge the actual history of the flag, and they're like, don't you get in my face with your facts and your history. You can shove your facts and your history. I think it means this, and therefore that's what it means, and don't you try and tell me otherwise. That kind of belligerent ignorance is part of it. There's this almost Orwellian kind of rewriting of history and doublethink that people seem to be operating with in defending the Confederate flag. But I also think that one of the factors that makes the Confederate flag this enduring symbol amongst Southerners, as one person on the news recently said, all my ancestors fought for the Confederacy, and that's not going to change. In American society, there's this attitude about the American Civil War in which, rather than view it as the United States versus their enemies, the Confederacy, it's often referred to as the war where brother fought brother. And it's also a war in which the country had to be reunified and stitched back together. And so, in essence, we're incredibly soft on the South. This attitude of trying to go easy on the Confederacy and the Confederate soldiers, and even in many parts of the country, primarily the South, to view them as heroes and have monuments to them, like Stone Mountain, Georgia, where there's the Confederate generals on their horses, and numerous other Confederate monuments throughout the United States. I think the general attitude is best summarized by a country song by the artist Johnny Horton called Johnny Reb, and I'll post a link to that song in the description, because the lyrics to that song basically sum up the attitude amongst many people towards the Confederate soldiers. It's almost the opposite of the Nazis, who are the enemy in American culture, who are essentially a kind of shorthand for evil. So this going soft on the Confederate Army and the Confederate soldiers and generals and so on, and making them out to be heroes in certain cases, I think is part of what has to do with why certain people view the Confederate flag as acceptable. Because they want to be able to look back at their ancestors and say, even though they may have fought for the wrong side, they were heroes too. I don't really have any sympathy for this point of view. They may have shown bravery and courage and valor and battle, but you can't completely overlook what they fought for. As to the second part of the question, how exactly the Confederate flag became this kind of pop culture symbol, this was something that I was really hoping to find an article on, because there were a lot of articles about the history of the Confederate flag in terms of the historical connections to slavery and racism of the flag. There was lots on that. There were some good articles about the way in which people have attempted to rewrite the history of the Civil War and claim that it was over things like states' rights and so on. Good articles in that regard, but how exactly the Confederate flag became this thing that became put on all sorts of merchandise, on t-shirts, on bikinis, on iPhone cases, on the mud flaps of trucks, and how it became appropriated by people who really have no connection to the South, how it became the redneck flag, the rebel flag, this pop culture symbol that many people view as kind of innocuous, which caused people who were not Southerners, people who really should know better, people with no real ancestral interest in defending the honor of the Confederacy or Confederate soldiers or any of that, Yankees who've never set foot south of the Mason-Dixon line, defending this flag, how that came about. I mean, beyond certain, cultural touchstones like the Dukes of Hazzard, in its use in NASCAR and other things, and its popularization amongst Southerners and rednecks and so on, how exactly it became this kind of cultural symbol that people overlooked its history, its actual history and connotations. I can't really find very many good sources on that. So I think I understand why certain people defend the flag in regards to this sort of rewriting of history of the Civil War, of wanting to look on their Confederate ancestors as heroes, trying to downplay the role of slavery in the Civil War, and the attitudes about the American Civil War in the United States, because the Civil War is not that far out of living memory. The last Civil War veteran died in 1959. So there are still echoes within American society of the American Civil War that make it relevant in a way that something like perhaps the English Civil War is not. I don't know how many monuments there are in England to Cromwell and the New Model Army, and whether or not there are people who say, well, my ancestor fought for James and my ancestor fought in the New Model Army, and maybe they probably have reenactments on occasion. Everybody loves reenactments, right? But I don't think it has the English Civil War probably doesn't have the kind of cultural relevance in the UK that the American Civil War has here. What I'm interested in going forward from this point is to see, now that people can no longer plead ignorance as easily as to what the Confederate flag stands for, what its history is. Obviously, there will still be people who stand by the flag out of this kind of belligerent ignorance, like, you're not going to tell me what to think, and you can take your history and your facts and shove them up your ass. There's always going to be those reactionary sort of people who just aren't going to be told what to do and will just defiantly continue to use the flag as their symbol and pretend that it doesn't have the historical connections and connotations that it does. But I wonder, now that, say, Walmart and these other companies have stopped selling the flag, that it's becoming more common knowledge, the history of the flag and what it stood for and its connection to anti-civil rights and pro-segregation, the KKK, the Confederacy, all of these other racist connotations and historical connections of the flag, whether or not that will diminish its pop culture presence and its place as a kind of pop culture icon in American society, which it really has no business being to begin with. And whether or not this event will be a moment where that changes and it goes away as a kind of pop culture icon, which fewer and fewer people still hold to, or whether or not this will just be one of those things where everybody in their own echo chamber gets their version of things, and the Fox News crowd, it doesn't even permeate their reality, all of these facts about the flag, and so people will continue on using it as the symbol, ignoring its history, and it will continue to be this kind of pop culture symbol, or whether or not it will go away or diminish. But if any of you out there have any sort of historical narrative of how it became a pop culture symbol, like I said, I couldn't really find any good information on that. So if you have any thoughts about how that came about, I'd be very interested in hearing it. If you have any other commentary on what I've said, put it in the comments section, make a video response, and then put a link to that video in the comments section saying, here's a video response, because even though they got rid of video responses, you can do that. So I'm done rambling for now. Your thoughts in the comments section. Check out the description box for the link to that Johnny Reb song by Johnny Horton, and a few other interesting articles about the rewriting of history and that sort of thing. And have a nice whatever time it is.